When a man hurts you, the first thing you have to understand is this. Most of the time, he already knows exactly what reaction he's going to get. He's not guessing. He's not confused. He's seen it before. Maybe not just from you, but from life, from past situations, from patterns that repeat themselves over and over again. He expects emotion. He expects questions. He expects explanations. He expects long conversations that go nowhere. He expects that no matter what he does, there will still be access, still attention, still energy flowing in his direction. That expectation gives him comfort. And comfort is dangerous when it comes to respect. See, when someone believes they can hurt you and still have the same position in your life, they stop being careful. They stop being intentional. They stop valuing what's in front of them. Not always because they're evil, not always because they wake up wanting to cause pain, but because human nature responds to patterns. If every time there's hurt, the response is emotion and availability, the mind registers one thing: there are no real consequences here. That's why the reaction matters more than the words. Words can be ignored. Emotions can be dismissed. Tears can be misunderstood. But behavior forces awareness. Most people think power is found in confrontation. They think if they just explain better, speak louder, express more, the other person will finally understand. But let me tell you something real. Understanding is not the same as caring. A man can understand every word you say and still choose not to change. So repeating yourself doesn't increase your value. It slowly reduces it, because it teaches him that no matter how many times he crosses the line, you'll still be standing there trying to make him see your pain. And here's the hard truth most people don't want to hear. When someone keeps hurting you, they're not confused about what they're doing. They're confused about why it's allowed. That's why the expected reaction becomes a trap. The anger, the emotional conversations, the late night messages, the need for closure, all of that keeps the connection alive. And as long as the connection stays alive, the situation doesn't feel serious. It feels manageable. It feels temporary. It feels like something that can be ignored until later. A man expects you to care more than he does in that moment. He expects you to fight for clarity. He expects you to hold the emotional weight while he stays comfortable. And the moment you do exactly that, you unintentionally confirm his belief that you'll always be there no matter how poorly you're treated. But here's where the shift begins. The moment you don't respond the way he planned, the moment you don't follow the script he wrote in his head, something breaks. The familiar rhythm disappears. And when familiarity disappears, awareness shows up, because now there's no emotional reassurance, no dramatic argument to distract from accountability, no reaction to justify his behavior, just absence. And absence forces the mind to fill in the blanks. That's when confusion starts to grow, not the childish kind, but the deep, unsettling kind, the kind that makes a man replay conversations, the kind that makes him question assumptions, the kind that makes him wonder why the dynamic suddenly feels different. See, most people are not prepared for calm strength. They're prepared for emotion. They're prepared for chaos. They're prepared for confrontation. But calm strength, that disrupts everything. When you don't react, he starts asking himself questions you never had to ask out loud. Why didn't that hurt land the way it used to? Why isn't there a message waiting? Why doesn't this feel the same? And that's the power of not giving the expected reaction. It shifts the focus off your pain and puts it back where it belongs on his actions. Let me be clear about something important. This is not about manipulation. This is not about playing games. This is not about pretending not to care. This is about refusing to over-explain your worth to someone who already knows better. Because when a man hurts you, the loudest message you can send is not anger, it's standards. Standards say, I don't argue for respect. Standards say, I don't chase clarity from someone who created confusion. Standards say, I don't reward hurtful behavior with emotional access. And here's what most people don't realize. The reason the expected reaction feels so natural is because it comes from pain. Pain wants to be acknowledged. Pain wants to be seen. Pain wants relief, but strength understands that not everyone deserves access to your emotional world. When you react emotionally, you're still investing. When you explain yourself, you're still investing. When you try to fix what you didn't break, you're still investing. An investment without return leads to exhaustion. That's why the first step is recognizing the pattern. Recognizing that the hurt didn't come from misunderstanding, but from comfort. Comfort in knowing that no matter what happens, you'll respond in the same predictable way. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. And when you stop feeding the pattern collapses. The shock doesn't come from silence alone. The shock comes from consistency. One quiet moment doesn't change anything, but a shift in behavior that rewrites expectations. Now the mind has to adjust. Now assumptions don't work anymore. Now the old playbook fails. And that's when confusion turns into reflection. Because when someone loses emotional access without explanation, the brain searches for answers. It looks inward. It replays moments. It measures loss. And loss is the one thing that demands respect, not anger, not arguments, loss. Loss of presence, loss of energy, loss of availability. That's why reacting differently isn't about punishment. It's about protection. It's about choosing not to bleed in front of someone who caused the wound. And the most powerful part of all this, you don't have to announce anything. You don't have to give warnings. You don't have to explain the change. Growth doesn't explain itself. Self-respect doesn't argue. Strength doesn't negotiate. It simply moves differently. And when a man realizes the old reactions are gone, that's when he starts realizing something else too. What he took for granted is no longer guaranteed. That realization doesn't come from words. It comes from silence backed by action. And that's where real power begins. Silence makes people uncomfortable because it removes control. When words stop coming, when explanations disappear, the mind doesn't relax, it starts working overtime. That's why silence has so much power when used with intention. Not the silent treatment fueled by anger, not disappearing to provoke fear, but silence that comes from clarity. Silence that says, without saying anything at all, I see what's happening, and I choose to step back. When communication suddenly changes, the brain looks for reasons. It searches memory. It replays moments. It fills the empty space with questions. And that's exactly why silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. Arguments allow deflection. Arguments create noise. Arguments turn the focus away from behavior and toward emotion. Silence does the opposite. It removes distraction and forces attention onto actions. When you stop explaining yourself, something interesting happens. The responsibility shifts. There's no longer an emotional cushion to land on. No reassurance that everything is fine. No familiar pattern to lean on. The absence creates tension, and tension creates awareness. Most people are used to emotional accessibility. They're used to knowing they can say or do something and still receive engagement afterward. Silence disrupts that expectation. It breaks the rhythm. And when rhythm breaks, the mind notices. Silence creates space. And in that space, thoughts get louder. That's when questions begin to surface. Not the surface level questions asked out loud, but the deeper ones that stay internal. Questions like, did that go too far? Why doesn't this feel the same? Why is there no response? Those questions don't come from guilt at first. They come from uncertainty. And uncertainty is powerful because it shakes confidence. See, when you argue, you're still participating. When you explain, you're still engaging. When you react emotionally, you're still predictable. Silence removes predictability. And unpredictability forces people to reassess their position. This kind of silence isn't about shutting down. It's about stepping up internally. It's about deciding that not every feeling needs to be shared with someone who didn't protect it. It's about understanding that access to your inner world is a privilege, not a right. Silence also does something else. It gives you clarity. When there's no back and forth, no constant messaging, no emotional tug of war, You finally get to hear your own thoughts clearly. You start to notice how drained you felt. How often you explain things that should have been obvious. How many times you carried the emotional weight alone. Silence creates a mirror, and in that mirror, patterns become visible. And once you see the pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. That's why silence is uncomfortable for the other side, but grounding for you. It removes the chaos and replaces it with calm. And calm is dangerous to someone who thrived on emotional reactions. When silence shows up, the usual tactics don't work. There's nothing to argue with, nothing to twist, nothing to respond to. So the focus turns inward. Inward is where accountability lies. Silence doesn't accuse. Silence doesn't chase. Silence doesn't beg. Silence observes, and observation leads to realization. Another thing silence does is it resets power. Power doesn't come from having the last word. Power comes from knowing when words are no longer necessary. When you stop trying to be understood by someone who chose not to listen, you reclaim your energy. That energy no longer leaks into arguments that go nowhere. People underestimate how loud consistent silence can be. One quiet moment might be ignored, but sustained silence, that's different. Sustained silence sends a message that something has changed, that the door that was always open is no longer wide open. And when access changes, value is reassessed. Silence also removes emotional rewards. When hurtful behavior is followed by emotional engagement, it still feels like connection. Silence removes that reward. There's no emotional payoff anymore, and without payoff, behavior loses its leverage. This is why silence feels heavy, because it forces a reckoning. No response means no reassurance. No reassurance means no certainty. No certainty means reflection. And reflection is where growth begins or where regret begins. Silence isn't about disappearing forever. It's about pausing the dynamic long enough for truth to surface. It's about letting actions speak for themselves without commentary. It's about allowing someone to sit with the outcome of their choices without softening the impact. What makes this kind of silence so effective is that it's rooted in self-respect. It's not fueled by bitterness. It's not meant to punish. It's meant to protect. Protect your peace. Protect your time. Protect your emotional health. Because not every situation deserves your voice. Some situations deserve your distance. When you stop responding, the narrative changes. The focus shifts from how does this make you feel to why did this happen? And that shift is critical. Feelings can be dismissed. Causes cannot. Silence creates a vacuum, and vacuums pull truth to the surface. That's when realization starts to form, not always immediately, sometimes slowly, sometimes quietly. But it comes. Because without your emotional presence, there's nothing left to distract from reality. Silence also teaches something important about boundaries. Boundaries don't need speeches. They don't need ultimatums. They don't need explanations. Boundaries are enforced through behavior. And silence is a behavioral boundary. It says, this is where I stop. It says, this is no longer acceptable. It says, I choose peace over proving a point. And the strongest part, you don't lose dignity in silence. You gain it. There's a calm confidence that comes with knowing you don't need to convince anyone of your worth. That calm confidence is unsettling to someone who expected emotion, because emotion can be controlled. Calm cannot. Silence changes the dynamic because it removes emotional leverage. There's nothing to pull on anymore. And when there's nothing to pull on, the only thing left is reflection. That's why silence speaks louder than arguments. Arguments try to force understanding. Silence allows understanding to arrive on its own. And when understanding arrives without pressure, it hits deeper. Silence gives space for consequences to be felt. not explained, felt. Because loss is felt in quiet moments. Regret is felt in silence. Awareness is born when noise disappears. And in that quiet space, the message becomes clear without a single word being spoken. Access has changed, energy has shifted, and the old dynamic no longer exists. That's the power of silence. Growth is the one thing most people don't see coming. They expect arguments. They expect emotional reaction. They expect dramatic exits or sudden returns. What they don't expect is transformation. And that's why leveling up is so powerful. It doesn't announce itself and it doesn't ask for permission. When you shift your focus away from the situation and toward your own development, something fundamental changes. Your energy is no longer tied to what someone else did or didn't do. It's tied to where you're going. And that shift is felt even when nothing is said. Leveling up is not about proving anything. It's not about showing off. It's not about trying to be seen. Real growth is quiet. It happens in the daily choices that no one claps for. It happens when you decide to protect your time, your mind, and your standards without explaining yourself. Most people think confusion comes from mixed signals. In reality, confusion comes from lost access. When someone is used to having a front row seat to your thoughts, emotions, and availability, and that access slowly disappears, it creates a kind of mental whiplash. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because the familiar is gone. Leveling up changes how you move. You stop reacting and start responding selectively. You stop being everywhere and become intentional about where your energy goes. You stop overextending and start conserving. And conservation is powerful because energy is currency. When your energy is no longer easy to reach, it becomes valuable. That's when behavior gets re-examined. Not because you demanded it, but because the dynamic changed. Growth shifts the balance without confrontation. It doesn't push. It doesn't pull. It simply elevates. One of the most misunderstood things about growth is that it's not loud confidence. It's quiet certainty. Loud confidence still seeks validation. Quiet certainty doesn't need it. And when someone encounters that shift, it's unsettling. Because they're no longer dealing with the same version of you. The version that explained everything. The version that overgave. The version that tolerated confusion. That version doesn't show up anymore. Instead, there's calm, there's focus, there's distance where chaos used to live. And that distance forces awareness because now there's nothing to engage with except the reality of what was lost. Leveling up also changes your standards. And standards are not rules you announce, they're limits you enforce. You stop negotiating things that cost you peace. You stop justifying behavior that doesn't align with respect. You stop bending yourself to maintain connections that drain you. And here's the key. You don't have to tell anyone your standards have changed. They'll feel it. They'll feel it when access becomes limited. They'll feel it when responses become measured. They'll feel it when availability is no longer guaranteed. Growth introduces structure, and structure replaces chaos. When you're growing, you become harder to manipulate, not because you're guarded, but because you're grounded. You're no longer moved by guilt. You're no longer swayed by inconsistency. You're no longer pulled into emotional loops that lead nowhere. And that stability is confusing to someone who benefited from instability. Another part of leveling up is internal discipline. You stop chasing closure. You stop replaying conversation. You stop seeking validation from someone who couldn't offer consistency. That internal discipline is invisible, but its effects are obvious. You become less reactive, more observant, more selective. And when someone realizes their actions no longer trigger the same responses, it forces a realization. The influence is gone. That realization doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with quiet moments. Moments where the absence is felt. Moments where the mind tries to reach for what used to be there and finds nothing. Growth also shifts identity. You're no longer defined by what you tolerated. You're defined by what you choose now. That identity shift is powerful because it changes how you see yourself. and how you see yourself determines what you allow. When you level up, you stop asking, why did this happen? And start asking, what does this teach me? That question alone changes everything. It turns pain into information. It turns disappointment into direction, and direction is magnetic. People are drawn to those who are moving forward with intention, not desperately, not angrily, but steadily. That steady movement sends a message without words. Life is expanding. And when life expands, the past feels smaller. Leveling up doesn't mean pretending the hurt didn't matter. It means refusing to let it define the future. It means extracting the lesson without carrying the weight. And that's strength. Strength is not in holding on. Strength is in outgrowing. When you focus on building yourself, your goals, your health, your mindset, your environment, you naturally detach from what no longer fits. That detachment isn't forced. It's organic. It happens because you've outgrown the container. And when someone sees that growth from the outside, it creates a disconnect. Not because you change to impress, but because you change to evolve. Evolution creates distance. Distance creates reflection. Reflection creates realization. That's the chain reaction most people don't anticipate. Leveling up also restores your authority over your own life. You stop seeking permission to move on. You stop waiting for apologies that may never come. You stop hoping someone else will fix what you've already decided to heal. That self-authority is confusing to someone who expected dependence, because dependence feels predictable. Independence feels final. And nothing forces respect faster than realizing someone no longer needs what was once given freely. Growth doesn't chase acknowledgement. It doesn't look back to see who's watching. It keeps building. And in doing so, it rewrites the narrative. The narrative is no longer about being hurt. It's about becoming stronger. It's no longer about what was taken. It's about what was gained. And the moment that shift happens internally, everything else follows. Your posture changes. Your tone changes. Your presence changes. And presence is felt before words are ever spoken. That's why leveling up is the real message. It's not sent through explanations or ultimatums. It's sent through consistency, through calm, through forward motion. Because when someone realizes you didn't break, you built, they're forced to confront something uncomfortable. The loss wasn't temporary. It was transformational. And transformation doesn't go backward. That's the power of growth. The real power move is never loud. It doesn't come with speeches, explanations, or dramatic exits. It comes quietly through consistency, through calm decisions repeated day after day. Most people think strength looks like confrontation, but real strength looks like restraint. It looks like choosing dignity when ego wants attention. It looks like moving forward without dragging the past along for validation. When you stop announcing your intentions, something shifts. There's no warning shot, no final conversation, no emotional closure scene, just a change in how you move. And that change speaks louder than anything you could ever say. Forward motion is intimidating because it doesn't invite debate. It doesn't ask for understanding. It doesn't wait for agreement. It simply continues. And when someone realizes you're no longer stuck in the same emotional place, it forces a reckoning they can't escape. The power move is calm confidence, not forced confidence, not performative confidence. Calm confidence that comes from knowing you did what you could, learned what you needed to learn, and chose yourself without bitterness. That kind of confidence doesn't try to convince. It doesn't need witnesses. It's steady. What makes this so effective is that it removes drama from the equation. Drama keeps people connected. Drama keeps emotions circulating. Drama gives excuses to stay involved. When drama disappears, clarity takes its place. And clarity is uncomfortable for anyone who benefited from confusion. Moving on quietly doesn't mean nothing mattered. It means you refuse to let what happened control your future. It means you're done reopening wounds for the sake of explanation. It means you understand that peace doesn't require permission. One of the hardest things for people to accept is when they no longer have access to your emotional world. Not because you blocked them out of anger, but because you closed the door with intention. That intentional distance sends a message that can't be argued with. No reaction means no leverage. No leverage means no control. No control means reality sets in. And reality is where accountability lies. The power move is choosing self-respect even when silence feels uncomfortable. Even when part of you wants to explain. Even when part of you wants to be understood. Because not everyone deserves to understand you. Some people only deserve to feel the absence of what they didn't protect. There's a maturity that comes with realizing that closure is something you give yourself. It's not something you wait for. Waiting keeps you tied to the past. Choosing releases you from it. When you stop seeking validation from the same place that caused the pain, you reclaim your authority over your time, authority over your energy, authority over your emotions. And authority is deeply unsettling to someone who expected access. The power move is also knowing that you don't need to win. You don't need to be right. You don't need to be remembered as the one who explained everything perfectly. You just need to be at peace with the choices you made. Peace doesn't argue. Peace doesn't chase. Peace doesn't prove. Peace moves on. Another thing about this kind of forward motion is that it exposes intentions without confrontation. When you stop engaging, the truth surfaces naturally. Effort either shows up or it doesn't. Consistency either appears or it doesn't. You no longer have to guess. Silence combined with growth creates a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. The power move is also accepting that not everyone will understand your decision and being okay with that. Understanding is optional. Respect is not. And respect often arrives after access is removed. When you elevate without resentment, it creates a contrast. The contrast between who you were and who you are now become. Obvious. Not because you pointed it out, but because it exists. That contrast is what lingers. It lingers in moments of quiet. It lingers in reflection. It lingers in realization. And lingering thoughts are far more powerful than loud words. The power move is choosing not to carry bitterness forward. Bitterness keeps you tied to the very thing you're trying to escape. Letting go doesn't mean excusing behavior. It means refusing to let it rent space in your future. Forward motion with dignity changes the narrative. The story is no longer about what went wrong. It's about what came next. And that next chapter doesn't include explanations for those who didn't read the last one carefully. There's also freedom in knowing you don't owe anyone an emotional performance. You don't owe reactions. You don't owe updates. You don't owe access. You owe yourself honesty. Honesty about what you deserve. Honesty about what you'll no longer accept. Honesty about where your energy belongs. The power move is living in alignment with that honesty. When someone realizes that you didn't collapse, didn't beg, didn't seek revenge, but instead chose growth that disrupts their expectations. Because they expected pain. They expected anger. They expected chaos. They didn't expect peace. And peace is confusing to someone who anticipated damage. Peace sends a message without hostility. I'm okay without this. And that message is final. The most powerful endings are quiet. They don't close with arguments. They don't close with explanations. They close with distance and clarity. When you stop looking back to see if you're missed, you step fully into your future. And that future doesn't need approval from the past. The power move is understanding that dignity is always noticed, even when it's not acknowledged, even when nothing is said, even when there's no response. Dignity leaves an impression that time can't erase. And the last thing to understand is this: moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. It means learning without resentment. It means carrying wisdom instead of wounds. That's real strength, not the strength to fight, but the strength to rise. And when you rise without noise, without bitterness, without explanation, the message is unmistakable, the chapter is closed, the lesson is learned, and the future is no longer up for negotiation. That's the power move.